The Siege of Yorktown, 1781. The American Revolution series. Starring these guys. So this video is a note-taking video, which means your kids, as they watch it, can be taking notes as they watch the video. Also, stay tuned afterwards for my Yorktown game. One of them's a chess game, so 3 different games you can play all about Yorktown. In 1781, the American Revolution was still happening, even though it started in 1775. So, you had the British in towns like Charleston and New York, and the Americans had control of Boston, Philadelphia, and a base outside of New York. But the Americans weren't alone. They had their trusty allies, the French, from France. The French had joined after the Battle of Saratoga, when they realized that the Americans had a fighting chance of winning. Now, the American Navy was small. At its peak, it only had 31 ships. By the end of the war, the British had close to 500 ships. So, you could see why the Americans needed a little bit of help from the French. The French were able to add their 63 warships to help the American Navy. Obviously, that's a whole lot less than the 500 British ships, but nothing to sneeze at. After some skirmishes with the Marquis de Lafayette, the British general named Cornwallis decided to relocate his base to Yorktown, Virginia. But as historians will tell us, this was not a good idea. Like a bad move in chess, Cornwallis was easily able to be trapped where he was. Meanwhile, George, Washington that is, was stationed in a base outside New York City. Why is he posing like that? Washington was planning on attacking New York City until he got word from Admiral de Grasse that Cornwallis had stationed his troops in Yorktown. And this was the perfect time to crush him! Notice on the map, Yorktown and New York are totally different places. So General Rochambeau and Washington joined forces and marched south towards Yorktown. Some of their troops sailed down the Chesapeake Bay as well. Meanwhile, General de Grasse's troops had sailed from Haiti, and they were planning on blockading the British so they couldn't escape Yorktown. Yorktown. Now, the British had a number of ships here, but really only 4 warships, so they really weren't well equipped for a sea battle. Meanwhile, General de Grasse shows up with 28 warships and blockades the whole Chesapeake Bay. Some of the ships were sent to blockade the York and James rivers. Cornwallis wasn't too worried because he knew General Graves was on the way with 19 warships. So here the French General de Grasse and the British General Graves fought a mighty sea battle here called the Battle of the Capes. Pow pow, ba 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 boom! A number of General Graves' ships were damaged, so he retreated back to New York for repairs. Whoosh, splash, 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 bang, bang, pop. So after walking for 400 miles, Washington and Rochambeau show up, and they meet up with the Marquis de Lafayette, who's already been shadowing Cornwallis for a long time. So Cornwallis was trapped, and he knew it, both by the French blockade and by Washington and Rochambeau's troops. So the combined French-American force had a force of 17,000 troops, while the British only had a force of 8,000 troops. I said force like 3 times, never mind. And so began the long siege of Yorktown. Now you're probably wondering what a siege means. It's when they start bombarding the city to try and take it over. Alright, so let's take a look at who was there. We had George Washington. He came with General Rochambeau, who was French. There was General Graves. He came down on the ships, but was defeated. And General Cornwallis, who was trapped. Now you might be wondering what you might have to do if you laid siege to a city. Well, first you'd dig trenches, and as you can see in the picture on the top, there's an abattis, and the bottom picture is something called a redoubt. They were basically just a bunch of spiky sticks to stop horses and the enemy from getting in. Oh, here's a good picture. Okay, so you see those spiky sticks on the hill? This hill was called a redoubt, and that stopped them getting up the hill. The British also dug trenches so that they could protect themselves too. But But the Americans began their bombardment of Yorktown by firing off their cannons. As it got further into October, the Americans started to get closer by about 400 yards towards Yorktown. They had to capture some special hills called redoubts. This was accomplished by a French unit and also by Washington's right-hand man, Alexander Hamilton. Alexander Hamilton! Now, when Cornwallis realized he was basically defeated, he tried to get into a boat with his troops and escape over to Gloucester Point, but a storm kind of ruined his plans. Oh, that's so sad. Instead, he decided to come back and surrender to the Americans. Now, the battle at Yorktown and the surrender of 8,000 British and Hessian troops was soup-stoops important. Why? Because it was the last major battle in the American Revolution and led to the end of the war. It was October 19th, 1781, when Cornwallis surrendered at Yorktown. And then a funny little thing happened. As the British soldiers were marching out of the town, the Americans sung them this song. If buttercups buzzed after the bee, if boats were on land, churches on sea, if ponies rode men, and if grass ate the cows, and cats should be chased into holes by the mouse. If the world was turned upside down. And pretty soon, that's what it became known as. The world turned upside down. Eventually, in 1783, the Americans finally gained their independence officially from Britain. USA! 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 Soon is going to be a good time to pause the video and take notes. So, let's recap. France had allied with the Americans and increased their number of soldiers. General Cornwallis had set up his base at Yorktown. George Washington and General Rochambeau joined forces and sailed south. French Admiral de Grasse set up a blockade to stop the British from escaping. British General Graves was defeated by the French at the Battle of the Capes, and the defeat at Yorktown led to the end of the war. Okay, so a great way to follow up is to play a game all about the Battle of Yorktown. So, there's two different versions you can play, and this is how you play. Start with 4 counters each as the starting positions. You can play as the British or the French-American alliance. So the aim of the game is to place 1 counter on one of the other enemy's starting spaces to win. Here's an example of how a game could be played. First, the yellow player rolls 1 space and they get to move 1 space. The red player rolls 2 and they get to move 2 spaces. If you roll a 3, that means you get an extra counter on the board. But it has to be on your starting position and it has to be empty. If you roll a 4, that means that you can challenge any other player to a rock, paper, scissors fight. And whoever wins gets to keep their counter. Whoever loses, loses the counter. Next, the yellow player rolls a 1, so they get to move 1 space. Red player rolls 2, move 2 spaces. Yellow player rolls a 5, which means that they have to move their counter back to a port space. And the port spaces are indicated by the pictures that look like ports. Red player rolls a 6, which means they get some choices. They're going to move 2 spaces and try and challenge the yellow player. So, red player wins, they get to keep the counter on the board, which means the yellow player removes their counter from the board. If you're up for a challenge and you've got chess pieces in your classroom, check this out. This is the Yorktown game with chess pieces. Bishops are settlers, pawns are towns, rooks are forts, knights are cavalry, and you can also play optionally with queens, which will be a diplomat. You'll need this number of pieces for each player. So, let's take a little look. The aim of the game is to get 4 towns and 2 forts to win. Like the other game, you can play as either the British or the Americans. Now you start with a bishop each on your starting position. You can see down below that each player has 1 action per turn. So, on a water space, a player can move 2 spaces. On a land space, which are grey, they can only move 1 space. So these bishops are trying to get to the spaces that look like towns. And once they get there, they're going to turn their bishop into a town, and that's also going to take up 1 action per turn. So here you can see the black bishop is going to turn his settler into a town, and the yellow bishop is going to turn his settler into a town. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is fighting. So let's say the black player puts out a settler and the yellow player puts out a cavalry. The cavalry player attacks the settler. Now, it's rock, paper, scissors to see who wins. You can see that the yellow player gets to keep their player on the board. Now the black players decided to add something to the board so they can have a little bit of defense. Now there's a little bit of a danger here because the black knight or cavalry is able to attack that town. So the yellow player decides to turn their town into a fort. This way they can't be attacked anymore. Now the black player has to go and find a different target to try and attack. Just a reminder in the game, you can't jump over other counters, you have to attack them or go around them. Okay, so now we've got our yellow player and they're about to start their own town as the black player gets close to attacking them. But as you can see, they didn't turn into a fort in time, so now they can attack the town as well. In this case, the yellow town is defeated and it has to take its player off the board. So you can see there's a little bit of back and forth in the game. Now let's talk about optional diplomat play. Let's say the game's been going for a little while and you've got 2 forts for the yellow team and 3 towns. They're pretty close to winning, whereas the black has 4 towns and 1 fort. Now, let's say that each player brings out a diplomat, which is a queen if you're using the pieces. What can they do? Well, they can attack a town, and they have the power to convert it into their own piece or player. So that means you get a free town with your diplomat. They can also attack a knight or cavalry, and they can attack settlers as well. But of course they can't attack forts. You can also check out more videos on YouTube at History of Board Games.